All right, let's get started. Last week, a question came up on what is the Bible talking about when it's talking about baptism for the dead. So I printed some articles that I thought were, or an article that I thought was decent. I'll send them around. I did not run one per person, but there should be enough for one per family if you want it. The long and short of it is nobody has a clue what baptism for the dead is, except that we probably should not do it, and it was not necessary for salvation, and it was the crazy Corinthians. That's really the moral of the story on it. There's hundreds of different opinions. You could probably get multiple PhDs just for writing different theories on the same thing. Same issue, so nobody's got a clue, but I thought this was a decent article on it. And the reminder is from the article is that Paul's actually doesn't rebuff it and say don't, but he also doesn't talk about it being necessary for salvation or doing anything for salvation, and it's in the grand scheme of his support for the resurrection, which makes it even more confusing. So if you want to look through that, but we're not going to spend time there tonight, because I've already got more material than we're actually going to get through. So I'm going to let you guys decide which one of the two subjects we are likely going to short on time. Okay? So we're going to talk about two related but pretty different topics tonight. We're going to talk about the topic of the Lord's Supper, how that relates in with membership, but we're going to talk through the Lord's Supper, and similar to how we did last week with baptism. The other topic on for tonight is the topic of covenants in Baptist life and membership and the relationship there. So I will give you guys the option on which one you want to devote more time to, on which one we go with. So if you are in favor, my guess is if we tried to go 30 minutes, we probably will not go for it, but we'll see. All right, I'll give you 3 votes, 3 opportunities. Anybody need an extra copy? Lily's got some coming in now. Okay, at the back. All right, 3 opportunities. Attempt to go 50-50 on the time, or attempt more time on Lord's Supper, or attempt more time on covenants in Baptist life. Okay? 3 things there, 3 opportunities, and as we will let this be a congregational vote. Okay? I assume all of you are members, so we're in good shape. I will even violate our Constitution, bylaws, policy, and procedure manual by allowing those under 18 to vote. Okay? So, that said, 50-50 split will be option 1. Option 2 will be more time on communion or Lord's Supper. Option 3 will be more time on covenants in Baptist life. If you want to try to go 50-50, raise your hand. You can only vote once. 50-50, 3, I see that hand. All right. If you want to spend more time on communion and the Lord's Supper, raise your hand. All right. 2 there. If you want to spend more time on covenants in the life of Baptist churches, raise your hand. And we have not a majority, but we have a winner. So that is where we will go. I will try to go about 40-20 or 2/3 of the percentage. So I'm going to try to walk through stuff. Let me set myself a timer so that we work through it fairly quickly. All right, despite the fact that we're going to walk through this first portion quickly, I'm still going to give out, as we did last week, we're going to divide this half of the room and go against this half of the room. But I do see that the moderator has changed sides, trying to weight it in his favor, I believe. So I'm actually going to have to use the clerk tonight to keep score. And I will let you participate and keep score. So, but if he cooks the books, it may be a violation of the church covenant, which would be a problem. So no cooking the books back there, clerk, but we will let you clerk it. All right. I left you intentionally the first paragraph on baptism because it contains a reference to the Lord's Supper. And I want to come back to that in a few minutes, but that is why you have that. That is not accidental on it. But what is communion? Okay. Communion is a big deal because Jesus said to do it. It's commanded, ordained by Christ, but it's practiced differently in differing traditions. Okay. We won't go through all the different ways we've seen it for the sake of time on that. Other names for communion are the Eucharist, or giving of thanks, Lord's Supper. Some would refer to it as an ordinance, or others even a sacrament. What is communion? Here we go. Okay. Communion is a symbolic act of obedience where members of the church, through partaking of the bread, fruit of the vine, memorialize the death of the Redeemer and anticipate his second coming. Key words in there, big key word is in remembrance or memorialize, as opposed to becoming Christ's body and blood. All right, this side of the room first. Here's your first attempt to score a point. Who celebrates communion? What type of believers? Five seconds to answer before the other side gets to go.
All believers.
That is not what I am looking for. This side of the room.
Baptized believers.
Baptized is close, but it is not what I'm going for.
Worthy.
Worthy is really, really close, but from 1 Corinthians 11, go ahead and navigate there. The word that I'm going to use is examined. Examined believers are the ones that are supposed to be celebrating the Lord's Supper or communion. Examined does hint at the concept of worthy. Starting in verse 27. Whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty concerning the body and blood of the Lord. Let a person examine himself. So, Pastor Jason, where did you get that concept of examined? Right from that word. Okay. I heard somebody say this week while listening to a sermon, when the guy that you're listening to preach or teach has all of these really huge ideas and you're like, I have no clue how you got that. That is absolutely fascinating. They're probably not actually doing a great job teaching the Bible. Like, we want to keep it simple. Deep truths, simple level, you ought to be able to see where things are coming from. Okay? Here, the word is examined. Let a person examine himself and eat of the bread and drink of the cup. Anyone who eats and drinks without discerning the body eats and drinks judgment on himself. That's why many are weak, ill, some have died. But if we judged ourselves truly, we would not be judged. When we're judged by the Lord, we're disciplined so we may not be condemned along with the world. Okay, the concept here is an examined believer, not someone casually partaking of the Lord's Supper, not somebody having a snack, okay? But an examined believer looking upon, as Lorraine said, whether or not they belong to Christ and are counted worthy because of Christ in their place. Okay? All right. Hard questions this week because we don't have a lot of them. All right. Why only those? Because anything else does what to the work of Christ in bringing forgiveness? This side of the room. You have 5 seconds to come up with an answer.
Undermines.
I will give that credit.
Oh.
I'll give it credit. Anything else undermines the work? I was going to go, the word that I had there is mocks. Makes a mockery of the work of Christ. But undermines in the way that it's portrayed. It doesn't undermine it and make it not effective, but it hits at the attitude of the heart on the person. So it makes a mockery. To not examine yourself before taking the supper is to make a mockery of the death and resurrection of Christ that you are supposed to be remembering as you partake in the supper. That is the who of communion. Okay? The where, the when, the how. Okay? Well, how often? Where should we take communion? Okay? The frequency and location varies by tradition. The important thing is that it is celebrated, this side of the room.
Regularly? He said reverently. I don't know what they said.
I heard regularly from the front row, reverently from the back row. You guys want to take a better attempt? Sorry, you want to make an attempt at getting more precisely what I'm going for?
Earnestly.
Consistent.
I heard consistently, which is too close to regularly. Earnestly is actually the concept that I was going for, truthfully. The frequency and location varies. The important thing is it's celebrated truthfully or in an examined manner. Yes, should be regular, but we don't have what the definition of that is. Is that what you were going with?
I was just going to ask, kind of going back to what we talked about with the who.
Yeah.
Is what does it mean to truly examine? Is this just determining whether you're a believer or not, or do you have to like somehow fix yourself before you come to God? What does that actually mean?
Yep. So Jacob raises, it's something that I was going to cover in a couple of minutes, but what does it mean to examine yourself in light of partaking of the supper? Okay? So first and foremost as to whether or not you are a believer. But secondly, Corinthians actually deals not simply with their examining of themselves as an internal action, but talks to the Corinthian church about their external relationships. So one of the problems that they were running into in the Corinthian church is that their internal relationship with Christ was not being manifested in their external relationships with each other, and they were fighting, arguing, bickering, and then taking something, and Paul's like, that's not the supper, that's a snack. That's not you partaking as an examined believer, and you're bringing judgment on yourself by treating something that is to be holy as something that is common, because they were not looking out at those around them. Okay, I give 4 different directions to look in the Lord's Supper. We look out at those around us. How is your relationship with other believers? Because the supper is given not to individuals, but to the church. And it's being taken as part of the church in Corinth where they have problems. And they're not examining their external relationships as they take the supper. So we are to look out around at those around us, praying for and pursuing unity as a body. We are to look back to Christ's work. We look back in memory of Christ's death, his burial, his resurrection. We look back at the Passover celebration made better through the Lord's Supper. Okay? We look back with the intent of remembering as if we were there when Christ took the elements, as if we were there when Christ gave his body and rose from the dead. Okay? We look back at his once for all. It doesn't become new again. So the supper is not, the elements are not magically transformed into Christ, and it does not become Christ dying again and his body literally being shed again. We look back at the once for all nature, but we also look ahead. In Corinthians, it talks about doing these things, in Matthew, 1 Corinthians. Back over in 1 Corinthians, I believe my notes just have verse 26. I'm like, which one? Verse 28, 26, 26? Or 1 Corinthians 26? 26, 26, there we go. 1 Corinthians 11, 26. As often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. And this was reflected in the Baptist Faith and Message statement on baptism, the forward-looking nature of the supper. It is there's a forward-looking nature. So we look ahead to Christ's return. We look out at those around us. We look back to the cross and resurrection. We look ahead to Christ's return. And then we look in for sin. making sure that we are walking in right relationship with God as best we can, confessing our sins to Him, knowing that He is faithful and just to forgive us, to cleanse us, and to lead us by His Spirit. We pray as David did in Psalm 139, search my heart, O God, and see if there be any wicked way in me and lead me in the everlasting way. Not looking in to see if we are perfect, but looking in to see if what God says about sin is what we are saying about sin with our life. Are we confessing and agreeing with God? So, what does it mean to take the supper in a worthy manner? I think it's examined manner is where we want to be. But worthy manner is not to see if we are worthy on our own, but to recognize our unworthiness and our trust in the worthy Savior who forgives our sin. All right, so there's directions to look in the supper. All right. Back to, that's the who, that's the where, that's the what to look at. Doing pretty good on time on this one. All right. So, celebrated truthfully or earnestly. So we're at a point over here, we're at a point over here, but it comes to you guys next. Okay, there's a variety of ways the elements are celebrated. Important things, they're celebrated truthfully, just like frequency, truthfully. Okay. Why is communion celebrated? It deepens our faith, it grows us in grace as we obey Christ's commands and celebrate it in remembrance of His work. I should not have given you that one. And I've now given you the next one. I'm looking down at my notes and I'm like, oh, I got a bunch of blanks. Oh, I just gave you those blanks. Okay. See if I can come up with a question so that we can break the tie, because they started it.
There's not a tie.
What's the score?
I don't have a point over here.
I gave you guys one on the earnestly, truthfully. I gave them an opportunity to answer better, and then I'm showing favoritism to a staff member by letting her answer when it was actually their turn. They should have copied your answer, but they didn't, so I'm showing favoritism, which James talks about not doing, but... All right. I will come up with another question as we go, but it will not. Let me go with this one. Let you guys think for a minute. I'm going to give you about 30 or 45 seconds to discuss amongst yourselves both sides. Okay? Can the Lord's Supper be taken? Jacob, you're not allowed to answer this one. No participation. Can the Lord's Supper be taken by non-baptized believers? Start your discussion. You will get to go first, and their response will have to be better than yours for them to win the point. Okay? Discuss amongst yourselves. Discuss amongst yourselves. Can the Lord's Supper be taken by non-baptized believers?
Tom, what do you think? That would be in my mind, I think.
Well, were all of the disciples baptized before they...
Is it the can question or a...
So I think
Should.
if you're a true believer, like you actually believe in God, then you have to be baptized.
You changed it to should instead of can? We're such legalists over here, okay?
We had the lawyers.
I will let you answer whichever question you want to answer, because both of them are actually fun and fair.
You just took it. Did you copy what you're going to say? Did you get it? So you know what you're going to say?
You have 10 seconds.
No, I already answered it. I got a full point. Go ahead. What do you say, Lily? Yeah, but
Does it have the same meaning though?
All right, and that is time. this side of the room, are you going with can or should, or are you going to answer both of them?
If you're supposed to examine yourself and there is something there, which is you're not following in obedience in baptism, then you shouldn't do it, because when you've examined yourself, you'll see that there is something that you've yet to do.
Okay.
Before you do it.
Good answer. All right. Now this side of the room.
So we said on the can, it would be yes, but on the should, it would be no.
Why can?
Because people could do it, and it's not like we're going to tackle them down if they do it. Take that word literally.
We're not going to guard the table that well?
No, I don't think we are.
Show me your card.
The deacons are going to be having a new responsibility. Baptism examination. If you did not bring your baptism certificate.
We would say, yeah, but you shouldn't. Like how you have often said from the pulpit on a Sunday when we're doing the Lord's Supper, like I don't invite you to take the supper, I invite you to take Christ, right? And to examine your heart, like they said. So they shouldn't. But
Are we talking about believers' baptism or pedo baptism also in this discussion?
Does it matter? I mean, is the first one is the latter actually baptism?
That's a good question. Depends.
You missed last week. Man, that's just a dunk tank. Or taking a shower.
I will not go in the tank.
Once was it?
All right. So, what we are suggesting from this side of the room is that if a believer shows up in the room, but that has not been baptized, because it has to happen that you have to be a believer before you can have believer's baptism, whether it's 1 second later or 1 year later. Okay? So you would separate, you guys are saying you would separate the Lord's Supper from them and encourage them not to partake of it if they have trusted Christ and are not yet baptized.
We didn't say it in that harsh way. We said you're supposed to examine yourself. It's biblical. And if you've examined yourself, that would include, are you obedient? Do you have a problem with a friend? That's included into the thing.
Right.
Problem with a brother, you're supposed to leave there and do it. Now, do we go in and force it? No, but the fact of the matter is, that's a part of it. You have incompleted business that's supposed to be done before you come to the table.
Okay?
That is what we're saying.
I want to say, how about if you say, have somebody who's accepted Christ, but they're shut in and they cannot do this.
Yep. So we're getting further in on the shut-ins, whether or not they could be.
Have it at communion,
Yep.
but you can't take it to this one because they were never baptized.
Right.
Those
So-
shut-ins are probably not going to have it delivered to them anyway.
Well, so
The church I run.
so on this side of the room, we have the legalists that are, well, maybe not legalists, but we have the stringent rule followers that say, well, we're not going to keep you from it, but we don't think you should because you haven't been baptized. I think part of it, this side of the room, you guys are thinking through some other ways. You're thinking through similar things, but I think, Lonnie, to go to part of it would be for me on that case is this someone that we have delayed at a church baptism level because they've come forward and we don't have the tank ready yet? Okay? If they have, this goes back to where we were at last week a little bit, if they've done all the steps necessary on their end, but we've not yet filled the pool with them, I would be okay with them taking the supper because they've taken all steps available of obedience for them. That's loose on that one, but I would be okay with that one. But what if a convinced, as Jacob left now because he doesn't get to weigh in on this one, but what if a convinced Presbyterian shows up that was sprinkled as a child and it understands baptism differently? They think They have publicly confessed Christ as Lord. They affiliate with a Bible-believing Presbyterian church. They have no known hideous sin in their life. Would you turn them away? Sorry, because you guys don't want to actually turn them away. Would you suggest in conversation with them that they not partake of the supper because they have not been baptized by immersion post-salvation?
No.
Why not?
Because I let the Holy Spirit work on them to come around. In the meantime, they are doing it in remembrance of Christ.
Okay.
And what they believe is correct, even though it's wrong.
Yeah.
And the baptism thing. But we'll let the Holy Spirit work on them that way.
Okay. Now, hearing that side of things, raise your hand if you would advise them, if they pushed you down to it, there is no opting out. You are either telling them, celebrate the supper with us, or do not take the supper with us. Okay? Raise your hand on this side of the room. Hearing Jim's side, would you tell them yes to celebrate the supper? Okay. Now I'm going to make you raise your hand to say no, if you're going to say no. Tom, you're not voting?
I'm not voting.
Not voting? Disobedient to the pastor. Not voting.
Well, there's a difference between saying go ahead and there's also saying no. There is the
Right.
silent choice.
There is.
I'm letting them. I am not being their judge and jury. I'm not in that case. If they were to come and say, yes, the Baptists believe in baptism before that, but we are not a closed. I've been at there are other Protestant churches where you have to be a member of their affiliations too and have not participated, even though I have had communion at a Baptist church for decades. But this is, I don't see our church as that kind of a church,
Right.
or any Baptist church. They are not running down looking at your inward things. Now, if somebody was to ask, we have our opinion on it, but we are not a go restrict anybody, thing. So
We haven't tackled anybody for taking the
tackled
supper in vain
anybody.
yet.
And I don't think if a member of a different church that was somewhat affiliated with us, we would affiliated with Christ, we would sit there and nitnoid them that their faith is slightly different than ours. That doesn't seem very welcoming to come visit our church.
Yeah. As a abnormal circumstance, I'm willing to violate the Baptist Faith and Message 2000 on this one. As an abnormal circumstance. And what I mean by abnormal is in the sense of, one, a believer, I'm totally willing if a believer has said, I'm pursuing baptism, but we haven't baptized them yet, I'm okay with that. I'm also okay in the case of we've had historically in our church, we've had a couple or more than one, but that has identified with us on so many things where maybe one member of the family has a Baptist understanding of baptism and another member of the family does not have a Baptist understanding of baptism. I'm okay in that circumstance with saying, examine yourself and take the supper with us. As opposed to telling them, no, you can't take the supper with us because though you think you've gotten the baptism thing right, though you are publicly identifying with the believer, though you are, to the best we know of, like walking in right relationship with God and others, you shouldn't take it because you understand baptism differently than us. I'm okay in abnormal circumstances. Now, if a person were a convinced Presbyterian that wanted to, on their own, regularly worship with us, that would be a little bit different than them worshiping with a family member or coming with a family member that worshiped with us as well. And I'd want to have a further follow-up discussion on that one. But the really short phrase that I have often thought of with this one is that I would not withhold the supper from someone that I believe is examined and that I plan on sharing the heavenly supper with. Examined and that I think I would be sharing the heavenly supper with. So, in that way, I would be in violation of the Baptist Faith and Message 2000, although all of us, our church would be too, because we do not make sure that people have been baptized believers. Because it talks about baptism as a prerequisite both to membership and to the Lord's Supper. Although I think at this point probably the majority of Southern Baptist churches would hold a very similar position to what I just said in terms of abnormal circumstances, and not requiring the Lord's Supper. And not just from like, hey, I'm going to bar you from the table and have our deacons restrain you from taking the supper, but even from in private conversation saying, hey, yeah, you're okay to take the supper, best we know. I think the majority of Southern Baptist churches are in violation of the Baptist Faith and Message. And I think it would have probably been pretty close when it was written. But at this point, I think they are. So, all right. So, Pastor Jason, is there anywhere where you disagree with the Baptist Faith and Message 2000? There's a spot. Yeah. But the good news is, we're not a creedal people. We want to confess, but we don't have to hold to every jot and tittle of it. All right. Church covenants, church membership. This is not only about us. Okay? What I want to do is talk about a why first. Then I want to recap an article that I give you a copy of that I thought did a really good job. And rather than me walking through the entirety of it, I'm just going to recap it. And then we're going to examine some covenants from Baptist churches. Although at this point, Saddleback is no longer Southern Baptist. But Southern Baptist churches, when the covenants were there. Okay? And by the way, if you want to look at 40 more covenants from Baptist churches across history, Pastor Jacob has a book on them all the way into the 1600s, and you can read some of them. They get longer as time goes on, by the way, for the most part. Okay? So, covenants, here's what I'm going to give you to start off with. Covenants with Baptist churches are not new. The covenant that our church has is a replacement of a covenant that our church had. Okay? I went looking today to find out when the previous covenant for our church was written, and I cannot find out right now pretty quickly when it was written, but I found a copy in the 1981 Constitution and Bylaws of what we replaced in 2021. Okay? And it wasn't being voted on at that point. So I don't know how much older than 1981 it is, but I know that it was at least there in 1981. Okay? So it lasted for at least 40 years in the life of our church. The covenant is not a new idea. But I want to talk about the why of covenants before the historical examples and how Matt Capps articulates a why. So no cheating and looking ahead on that article. Church covenant is largely a series of commitments / promises, ethical obligations that correspond to doctrinal stuff. Okay? So a statement of faith is what a church believes. A covenant is what we say we're going to do, by and large. Why would a church have a statement of faith? Let's start there. Score right now is currently 2-1. And it is you guys' turn. First, why a statement of faith? Okay?
And it sets like that expectation of like, these are the things that are important in our system of beliefs so that people can know quickly if they align with that or not. And so that we can point people to what we believe should that be needed.
Belief and behavior.
Okay. So statement of faith. Good summary on that one. I'm going to let you guys, before I go back to them, why would a church have a covenant regarding behavior or ethical views and not just a statement of faith.
Kind of like the law of Moses, you got to hold people accountable too.
Okay. Other responses on this side of the room?
Wouldn't it have to have more in it? And just one line, get no faith, wouldn't have to explain so people can understand it.
Okay.
Unity of effort.
Lonnie? Yeah.
Unity of effort. If we all agree this is the direction we're going to go, then it's better, it's easier to get where you're wanting to go if everybody agrees this is the path we're taking.
Okay. So, we had a stronger answer because it was an easier question for the most part, because of what you have dealt with and worked through in your background for the most part, is stronger on statement of faith than it is on a covenant. Okay? The statement of faith is a consolidation of what we believe, largely on things that we think are important or controversial. We don't choose to put everything that we could possibly ever believe in a statement of faith. Okay? So also with a church covenant, well, everything that you do is probably, and that a church believes is important ethically and regarding their conduct together, is not always found in a church covenant. Okay? It's things that are deemed important for the unity, the witness of the church, the path both tying to the past and heading towards the future. It's a series of ethical obligations in addition to the series of doctrinal commitments. Okay, so one of the responses could easily be, well, why do we need a statement of faith? We have the Bible. That's our statement of faith. And there are some that subscribe to that. And that is true, but it takes a really long time to get through the whole thing. Well, why do we need a church covenant? We have the entire Bible to tell us how we ought to to behave. That is true. The entire Bible is our church covenant. And yet, there's a consolidated series of things, just as Tyler pointed out, that we have in the Ten Commandments that are reflection. The commandments are ways of living that they ought to have already known about God, that are played out through the entirety of the Old Testament, but they can also be summarized in love your neighbor, love God, and love your neighbor. Okay? So I don't want to put it on there and do a hot take thing, but if you wanted a really hot take, you could say that Jesus summarized the Ten Commandments with a covenant version or a statement of faith version by even consolidating the Ten Commandments, much less the entire law and prophets. Okay? Through love God, love neighbor. But we get a statement of faith pretty well on why there would be a statement of faith. Church covenant, it's not always as well articulated on the why of a covenant. But Baptists have been a covenant people. Now, how they handle that covenant has varied greatly. But why would Baptists, more so even than other denominations, care about a covenant within the church?
Less division.
Desired less division. I get that, but that's not that's a desire within the Methodists, that's a desire within the Presbyterians.
No, but I mean, the beliefs, they can, straighten how they believe, and this is okay to do.
Okay. So there may be some practical value for a congregation to be more united by them together working on articulating what the important obligations are versus a denomination that has a centralized bureaucracy handing down those things. There may be something there. I hadn't thought about it from that angle yet, but I think there's a bigger, more historically rooted in Baptist life understanding, something that's going, or issue that's causing it.
Statement of what we believe in.
It's a little bit of what we believe in, but normally a covenant is more based upon what we believe we will act upon than what we simply believe. But why would that be important for Baptists?
Because Baptists maybe are, well, at least in the Southern Baptist Convention, we're autonomous, congregational type of churches, and it's like this group, but we are within a larger group, maybe trying to define how we're going to live out in gospel community, something along those lines.
A little bit.
Well, we hold more firmly to baptism as going in the water, whereas a lot of denominations use sprinkling.
And let's think for a minute about what makes Baptists' understanding of membership in the church different than other denominations. Okay? What is the stated requirement to be a member in a Baptist church requires baptism, which we only do for who?
Profession of faith.
Believers. So, it is the position of Baptists that every member is a believer. There is no mixing of the membership between the believer and the non-believer. Is the goal of Baptist understanding of what a church is. That there could not be an unbelieving church member. Because to be a member, you must be baptized, and to be baptized, you must be a believer. And this was a big deal when Baptists were coming around and starting up. Okay? So, if you have a congregation that all proclaims through their lips to be believers, then you should have the expectation that proclaiming to be a believer is backed up by living like a believer. Whereas if you have an understanding of church that may have a mixed group of believers and non-believers, then you do not have that same expectation of non-believers. We should not expect non-believers to act like believers. But because we limit through the way that we bring in members to those that have been baptized after a statement of faith and confession of Christ as Lord, our expectation is that they are believers. Therefore, we expect them to act like believers. How do we measure acting like believers? Well, does it line up with the entirety of the Bible? That is correct. But more closely, just as we refer to a statement of faith as a consolidation and in our quick articulation of we believe the Bible, so in many cases for churches that have used covenants historically within Baptist life, they line up really, really well with the fact that Baptists have historically believed that to be a member of the church, you must be regenerated by Christ and be a believer, and that should be backed up by your faith in what you believe, but also what you practice. So it has been argued by some pretty solid scholars that the original mark of Baptist churches is not actually baptism, but of regenerate church membership and the corresponding actions of church discipline. Those two things are actually what's at the root of the original Baptists, was the ability to, all right, this isn't a mixed body, you are a believer. Therefore, when we come to passages like Matthew 18 and 1 Corinthians 5 that talk about the body acting as believers, we should expect you to act as a believer. And if you don't, we want to hold you to the standards of Scripture and deal with your sin in hopefully a redemptive and restorative manner. But that's not easy to do when you have a mixed body as opposed to what is expected to be a regenerate or a believing church body. Okay? Little deep dive in, but I think the reason that Baptists were historically a covenant people and were prone to make covenants was their agreement to do the one another's that could only be done when you have the expectation that every member is a believer.
Jason, what's an example of a mixed church? Because that kind of seems to go on. You can be part of our church, just don't believe what we believe. That doesn't make any sense.
I haven't sat down with my Presbyterian friends lately and asked whether or not a child that was sprinkled in their church that continues to attend a church that hits age 22 but has not confessed Christ as Lord is a member or not. But that would be a example that the early Baptists would have run into is, hey, these other traditions practice bringing the children through the church. We've thought of them as children of the church. Now they are members of the church, but whether or not they're actually believers, we didn't require them to be believers because they've always been here. They grew in. And then you got to decide what you're going to do with that. Is that a member or is it not? And I don't know how they practice that. I have not had that conversation.
I listen to a lot of Tim Keller. He preaches at a Presbyterian church. And one of the things that he always, when he speaks to the congregation, he speaks to them as if a lot of them aren't believers.
Mm-hmm. But that's also a mixed audience in New York too. So I don't know with that. So I don't know. But the presupposition of Baptists that was distinctive is that everyone in the church that was a member was a believer. And that was a early distinctive. I don't know how that's practiced today and how that's what's the gatekeeping mechanism for you were a part of this church, but you never, did you just not attend the members class or I'm sure it varies as broadly in other denominations as it does in ours and how you become a member. But if they're not a believer, you can't do a lot of things and expect believing behavior. So Matt Capps in his article gives a couple of things. He talks about them being consistent with Baptist history, that they follow a New Testament pattern, that there's a clear expectation or a concise, I would say, with expectation and clear teaching to the nature of the church. So there's some objections that he deals with, including the standard is the Bible, not other documents, and that this is too exclusive and demanding. I thought this was a good article. I know somebody that goes to this guy's church, and I thought this was just good stuff. Work through it, read through it. On the why churches of Baptist origins have covenants. And almost everyone does. The question is just whether or not they actually do much with it. And how they practice membership beyond that is vastly different, because I need you to separate for a minute the fact that we have an annual membership agreement process from the fact that we have a church covenant. We've had a church covenant for over 40 years. Okay? We've had an annual agreement process for 2 years. But we've had a covenant for a long time. Okay? And what I give for you is the pre-1981 version versus the 2021 version. When several in the room even aided in the drafting of the covenant that we now have, you'll see some similar concepts. Most of what was there was not bad. We just tried to consolidate it and update some language and talk about what we're striving for rather than what we will try not to do. Okay? In many cases. So what you have there is the 2021 version. Other things that you have is a covenant from 1853. This is the one that, by the way, Matt Capps takes a little bit to task on in his stuff, in his article, which, by the way, has a lot of language that we... Is that ours exactly?
It is. It's the one here. Yeah, it's the same.
I think there's a little bit of difference.
From 1853.
We thought that must have been
When you
pretty
said
good.
pre-1981. It's the exact same.
There's slightly different language. Nope.
It's the same. Which shows that we are pretty lazy.
Back then, so we just kept.
Works for me.
I see a comma missing.
All right, so at some point, our church, but by the way, this was actually printed in the Baptist hymnal for a while.
That's why we got
Okay. At some point, our church adopted one and made it ours, which is fine. I have no problem with that. Okay, so, but that explains some of the language that was a little bit dated in our old church covenant. Okay, but this was a big one. So I am surprised that some of this language was included in 1853, though. Okay. But you've got an updated version with what we strive for. Then you have a copy of the church covenant from Capitol Hill Baptist Church in D.C. They are pretty influential on the concepts of church covenant and membership and meaningful membership. That's why I copied that one, not just because they're close. And then you have one from Saddleback Community Church because they are not on the same theological spectrum as Capitol Hill Baptist Church by any means, and yet they had a covenant, and I don't dislike it either. There's lots of church covenants out there that I like. There's not that many that I actually dislike. There's a lot that I like on church covenants. To bring us towards the end, I want to ask this question. Relates to the covenant. Should a person that joins your church always be a member of your church, regardless of their behavior? Correct. We did. We had to deal with putting somebody out for not behaving right. But, so that presupposes that we, or at least those that led for that motion and voted for that motion, did feel that there are things a person can do that would cause them to no longer be a member in a church.
I think it was the fact that they will take correction. They will, if someone goes to them and tells them, hey, this is not right, you're doing this, and then they go make their correction. It's one thing. They
Yeah,
continue.
absolutely.
But they refuse to correct.
And it depends on the
Seriousness of the sin, the public nature of it,
Yeah.
the lack of repentance, pursuit. But there are some things. The moral of the story, the quick answer is yes, there are some things that a person should do can do that would cause them to no longer be a good candidate for membership in a church, period, much less a Baptist church. For example, renouncing Christ probably shouldn't remain a member of a church.
You're probably on faculty at some of the cemeteries.
Yeah. Okay. So renouncing Christ would not be healthy. That's not something that we would want. That type of person being a member of the church. Hideous ongoing, unconfessed, or unacknowledged sin as sin. Okay? That would be pretty abundantly clear. Okay? Whether we're talking, and how big of those types of things do they have to get, but there's some ways that we would look at it and say, all right, serial murderer, like, no, that's not wrong. We got a problem here. Okay? So there's some egregious examples. Should a church's membership exceed, be parallel to, or be under its attendance? Okay.
Under.
Should a church have, let me put it this way, have more members than attenders, very similar amount of members and attenders, or more attenders, more people in attendance than membership?
I think it also depends on the church's mission. If you're an outreach church, you probably will have more attenders than members, because those people, you're using church as an outreach versus a disciple.
They should become believers if that's,
Yeah,
so it should
yeah, what I'm saying.
Yeah, so it should be parallel, increasing, decrease, yep, close, or at least headed in a similar trajectory.
Like a college campus.
Okay. Should a church have 1,000 more attenders, 1,000 more members than attenders? No? That unhealthy? So our church was unhealthy in 1979?
Probably.
Read your newsletter today, 1979, average attendance 600, membership 1,600.
Well, there is a lot of Baptist churches, and this was not just ours. It was almost impossible to get off the rolls.
Correct. Almost impossible to get off the rolls even when you wanted to get off the rolls.
Part of the reason is they wanted to be able to somehow keep you tied to the church so that you might come back.
Yeah. There's some good intentions in that, but here's what I would suggest. If you've got that many more as a percentage, you're probably not faithfully following as much as you can of the expectations of God for taking care of your members.
It makes you look like a really dying church, because there's so many people that do not come. It's like something's wrong with this church.
Yeah. But listen, 5 years ago, some churches today, the question that you get is how many members, and they don't mean how many regular attenders that are members do you have. They mean how many members do you have? And by that, metric, our church shrunk by 80% about 3 years ago. Stayed pretty similar in our attendance, but we shrunk by 80% in our membership. Because we had some of those people from 1979 still on the roll that we hadn't seen since 1979, that they hadn't seen in 1979 either.
The pay levels that we get based on the membership of the size.
Yeah, the size of the church, all sorts of different things were there. So, how does a church care for its members? Many Baptist churches historically made use of church covenants to help them try to care for their people and try to manage, not control, but manage the membership of the church, so that you don't end up with 1,600 members and 600 in attendance. Now, I would be okay if there were never any guests coming in, if it wasn't an outreach-oriented church, it was just this deep discipleship church, maybe 1,200. But once your attendance starts being more than half, less than half of your membership, you've probably got something out of skew. Probably. or you've got a ton of non-believers that are worshiping regularly with you, which could be a really good thing, but it should be going trajectory parallel. Okay? That's how covenants have historically been used to take care of the witness of the church and to take care of the people. Our membership agreement process helps us stay with our church covenant and pursuing those goals. That's the intent. Whether or not it does a marvelous job is another matter. I mean, we had a church covenant. It was written all the way back in 1853. At some point, we subscribed to it, but we weren't following it super well. So, there's a little background on covenants and membership and their role in each other. We're out of time, so I'll stand around and take questions independently off camera until you guys need to go. But there we go, membership agreements. Read that article by Matt Capps. I really think that's good. If you're only going to read one thing from this, don't bother with all the historical and the other present covenants. Read that article. I think it's good. And we are done.